The blizzard had turned deadly an hour ago. Sarah Whitmore's fingers had gone numb around the reins, her horse stumbling through snow that reached its knees. She'd fled her uncle's house 3 days prior with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring, the last thing of value she owned. Behind her, somewhere in the white chaos, Luther Grimm and his sons were hunting. Her uncle had sold her to settle a gambling debt, and Luther Grimm collected what he paid for. The horse collapsed. Sarah fell hard, snow filling her mouth as she gasped. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Through the swirling white, she saw a dark shape, a cabin, solid and real against the mountainside. She crawled toward it, each movement agony, her vision blurring. Her frozen fingers found the door, and she pounded weakly, knowing this was her last chance. The door opened. A man stood there, backlit by firelight, so broad he filled the entire doorframe. He had to be 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed carved from the mountain itself. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, a thick beard covered half his face, and his eyes, gray as winter sky, went wide with shock. Before you continue with Sarah's journey, I want to ask you something important. If you're enjoying this story, please take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and leave a like on this video. Your support truly matters and motivates us to bring you more quality content like this. I'd also love to know, where are you listening to this story from? Are you at home, on a commute, or somewhere else? Now let's get back to Sarah and the Mountain Man. Please, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. She fumbled with her mother's ring, trying to pull it from her frozen finger. I can pay. I have gold. The man's massive hand closed gently over hers, stopping her. His touch was warm, almost burning against her ice-cold skin. Gold isn't what's needed here, he said, his voice rough from disuse but surprisingly gentle. You are. He scooped her up as if she weighed nothing, kicked the door shut against the storm, and carried her to the fire. Sarah's consciousness flickered as he wrapped her in furs, chafed her frozen hands between his own calloused palms, and held a cup of warm broth to her lips. Name's Ezra Kane, he said quietly. Been 7 years since I've seen another soul up here. 7 years since I've seen a woman. You're safe now. Sarah woke to daylight, streaming through small windows, and the smell of coffee and bacon. She was in a bed piled with furs, wearing a man's shirt that swallowed her frame. The cabin was larger than she'd thought. One main room with a stone fireplace, shelves lined with books, and hunting trophies on the walls. Everything was surprisingly clean and well-maintained. Ezra sat at the table, his back to her, his massive frame hunched over a cup. When he heard her stir, he stood quickly, moving to the fire without looking at her directly. Coffee's hot, he said, his voice gruff. Clothes are drying by the fire. Storm's still raging. Won't be safe to travel for days yet. Sarah pulled the furs around her and moved to the table. Up close, in daylight, Ezra was even more imposing. His arms were thick with muscle, his hands scarred from hard work. But his eyes, when they briefly met hers, held a gentleness that contradicted his bear-like appearance. Thank you, she said softly. I'm Sarah, Sarah Whitmore. He nodded once, still not quite looking at her. You running from something? Someone. Men who think I'm property they purchased. His jaw tightened under his beard. You're not property. You're a person. That's the end of that discussion. Over the next 3 days, as the storm raged, Sarah learned about Ezra Kane. He'd been a soldier once, fought in the war, came home to find his wife and daughter dead from fever, his farm burned by raiders. So he'd walked into these mountains 7 years ago and never left. "Figured I'd done enough damage in the world," he said one evening, carving a piece of wood by the fire. "Up here, I can't hurt anyone." "You saved my life," Sarah pointed out. "That's different." He still wouldn't look at her directly, as if afraid of what he might see, or what she might see in him. Sarah found herself studying him when he wasn't watching, the way his hands moved with surprising delicacy despite their size. How he'd leave the best portions of food for her while claiming he wasn't hungry. The care he took to give her privacy, to make her feel safe. He was nothing like the men she'd known. Her brutal uncle, the predatory Luther Grimm, even her own father who'd valued whiskey more than family. On the fourth day, the storm broke. Ezra prepared to take her down the mountain to the nearest town, his face carefully blank. "Or," Sarah said carefully, watching him pack supplies, "I could stay." His hands stilled. "Stay? I can cook, clean, mend. I'm strong. I can work. And," she hesitated, then pushed forward, "I have nowhere else to go. They'll find me in town. I can protect you in town, make sure you get somewhere safe. I feel safe here, with you." Ezra turned finally, really looked at her, and Sarah saw the war in his eyes. Loneliness battling with fear, desire fighting with self-imposed isolation. "You don't know me," he said roughly. "Don't know what I've done. I know you gave me shelter when I had nothing. I know you treated me with respect when other men—" She took a breath. "I know I want to stay, if you'll have me." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire. "1 month," Ezra said finally. "We'll try for 1 month. See if you still feel that way when cabin fever sets in and all you've got for company is a bitter old bear of a man." Sarah smiled, the first real smile in months. "I think I can manage a bear." The days fell into a rhythm. Sarah cooked and mended, while Ezra hunted and gathered firewood. He taught her to shoot, his large hands steady over hers as he showed her how to aim his rifle. She learned to read the weather in the clouds, to identify animal tracks in the snow, to move quietly through the forest. But it was the evenings that changed everything. By the fire, they talked. Some deserved it. Some, I'm not sure anymore. How does a man like that deserve anything good? Sarah moved closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his massive frame. How does a woman who ran away, who brought danger to your door, deserve the kindness you've shown? That's different. No, it isn't. She took his scarred hand in hers, felt it tremble. We're both just people trying to survive our pasts. Maybe we could try surviving together. Ezra's fingers closed around hers, gentle despite their strength. You make it sound simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we're the ones making it complicated. The first kiss happened during a snowstorm, 2 weeks later. Ezra had been teaching Sarah to throw a knife, standing behind her, his arms around hers to guide her aim. When she'd finally hit the target, she turned in excitement and found herself pressed against his chest, his face inches from hers. "Sarah," he breathed, and it sounded like a prayer and a warning all at once. "Yes," she whispered back, answering the question he hadn't asked. His lips met hers softly, tentatively, as if he expected her to pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, feeling the solid muscle there. He groaned and pulled her closer. The kiss deepening, 7 years of loneliness pouring into that connection. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ezra rested his forehead against hers. "We should go slow," he said, his voice rough. I don't want to hurt you. You won't. I trust you. I don't trust myself. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. When I touch you, all I can think about is... He stopped, shaking his head. You deserve courting, romance, not some mountain hermit who's forgotten how to be human. Sarah cupped his bearded face in her hands. You're the most human man I've ever met. You feel things so deeply you had to hide from the world. That's not weakness, Ezra. That's evidence of a heart that still works. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring. That night, they sat by the fire, Sarah tucked under his arm, feeling safer than she'd ever felt in her life. But safety, they both knew, was temporary. The danger came on a bright morning 3 weeks later. Sarah was outside hanging laundry when she heard horses. Her blood froze. She knew that sound. Luther Grimm and his sons, 3 of them, riding up the mountain trail. She ran inside. Ezra, he was already moving, having heard the horses. He grabbed his rifle, then stopped, looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. Sarah Whitmore, he said, his voice steady and sure. I know we've only had these few weeks. I know I should court you proper, give you time. But if we survive this day, I'm asking you to be my wife. Not because you need protection. Not because I'm lonely. But because in 3 weeks, you've become the reason I want to wake up in the morning. Will you marry me? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her hard, then pushed her toward the back room. Stay hidden, no matter what you hear. Please, I'll die before I let them take you, but I need to know you're safe to do what needs doing. Sarah nodded, but she grabbed his hunting knife as she moved to the back room. She wasn't going to hide while the man she loved faced 3 armed men alone. Luther Grimm's voice carried through the door. Kane, we know you got our property in there. Send her out and we'll leave peaceful. The woman's under my protection, Ezra called back. She's not property, and she's not leaving. We paid good money for her. Her uncle had no right to sell what wasn't his. She's a free woman, and she's staying that way. Then I guess we do this the hard way. Gunshots exploded. Sarah heard Ezra return fire, heard him take cover. She peered through a crack in the back room door and saw him crouched behind his overturned table, blood seeping through his shirt sleeve. He was outnumbered, and they knew it. Sarah made her decision. She slipped out the back window, circling around through the trees. Her weeks of learning to move quietly served her now. She spotted the youngest Grimm brother at the side of the cabin, reloading. Before she could second-guess herself, she rushed him, knife raised. He turned, but too late. They struggled, and Sarah felt the knife sink in. He fell with a cry. She grabbed his rifle, her hands shaking, but steady enough. The element of surprise was hers now. She fired at Luther Grimm from the side, hitting him in the leg. He went down howling. The third man, one of Luther's sons, turned toward her, and that's when Ezra burst from the cabin. The 2 men faced each other, both armed, both deadly. The son fired first. Ezra stumbled, blood blooming on his chest, but he didn't go down. He fired back, and the son dropped. Sarah ran to Ezra as he fell to his knees. No, no, no. I'm all right, he gasped. But blood was spreading fast. Grazed the ribs. Looks worse than it is. But Sarah had seen enough death to know a serious wound. She helped him back inside, Luther Grimm moaning in the snow behind them, no longer a threat. The youngest son was dead. The other would need better help than she could give, but he'd live to stand trial. Inside, Sarah tore Ezra's shirt open. The bullet had plowed through his side, missing vital organs but causing serious damage. Her hands shook as she heated water, gathered clean cloth. Go slow. Ezra said through gritted teeth as she cleaned the wound. "It hurts." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down her face as she worked. "You almost died because of me." "No." His hand caught hers, bloody and strong. "I almost died protecting the woman I love. There's a difference. And you saved my life. Coming from behind like that. We're a team, Sarah. Together." "Together," she agreed, the word of vow. She stitched him up with trembling hands, wrapped his torso in bandages. By the time she finished, other men had arrived, neighbors Ezra barely knew, drawn by the gunfire. They took Luther Grimm and his surviving son away. The sheriff, an older man named Tucker, stayed behind. "Grimm's been causing trouble for years," Tucker said. "Won't anymore. Self-defense, clear as day." He looked at Sarah. "You're free, miss. Grimm's claim is void, and your uncle will face charges for human trafficking." After everyone left, Sarah sat beside Ezra's bed, holding his hand. "You asked me to marry you," she said softly. "I did. Still asking if the offer stands. When you're healed, I want to marry you properly, with witnesses and vows and everything." Ezra smiled, the expression transforming his hard face into something beautiful. "You want witnesses after 3 weeks? I want the world to know I chose you, that you chose me, that we're not just surviving anymore, we're living." He pulled her down for a kiss, gentle despite his pain. I like the sound of that. 2 months later, on a bright spring morning, they married. Sheriff Tucker officiated, and a handful of mountain folk attended. People who'd slowly been drawn to check on the hermit and his bride-to-be, curious about the pair who'd faced down the Grimm gang. Sarah wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Ezra wore clean clothes, his beard trimmed, his gray eyes shining with something Sarah now recognized as hope. "I, Ezra Kane, take you, Sarah Whitmore, to be my wife," he said, his deep voice carrying across the clearing. "I promise to protect you, to respect you, to love you every day we're given. You brought me back to life when I thought I was done living. For 7 years, I saw no one, until one night when you knocked on my door, and in that moment, everything changed." Sarah squeezed his hands, her own vows ready. "I, Sarah Whitmore, take you, Ezra Kane, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you, to challenge you, to love you with everything I am. You saw me at my lowest and treated me like I was worth saving. You gave me not just shelter, but a home, a life, a future. I choose you, Ezra, today and always." They sealed their vows with a kiss, and the small gathering cheered. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the cabin porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Inside, she could hear Ezra moving around, preparing dinner. They'd added onto the cabin, built a proper bedroom and a workshop where Ezra carved and Sarah painted. Neighbors visited occasionally now, and twice a month they rode down to town for supplies and socializing. But their favorite moments were still the quiet evenings by the fire, wrapped in each other's arms, no longer running from their pasts, but building their future together. Ezra came out, wrapped his arms around her from behind, and kissed the top of her head. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How I almost traded my mother's ring for a meal. How desperate I was." And now, Sarah turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her whole world. "Now I'm wealthy beyond measure. I have a home, a partner, a future, and love. So much love. We're lucky, Ezra said, both of us, to have found each other. Not luck, fate, or maybe just two broken people who decided to heal together. He kissed her softly. However it happened, I'm grateful every day. For 7 years I hadn't seen a single woman, until one night when the mountain man begged to make her his wife, and she said yes. Sarah laughed. You did beg quite prettily. And I'd do it again, every day if you asked. No need, I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. Together, remember? Together, Ezra agreed, the word that had become their motto, their bond, their forever. They stood there as darkness fell, two souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and built something stronger than either had thought possible. A love forged in hardship, tempered by respect, and polished bright by the simple joy of choosing each other every single day. The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to their story, guardian of their peace. And in the warm glow of the cabin windows, two people who'd once been lost had finally found their way home. To each other. The first winter as husband and wife brought challenges neither had anticipated. Snow fell heavier than Ezra had seen in years, blocking the mountain pass for weeks at a time. But Sarah had grown strong during her months on the mountain, and together they faced each hardship with determination and surprising joy. One particularly brutal morning, Sarah woke to find frost coating the inside of the windows and their water supply frozen solid. Ezra was already up, stoking the fire to a roar, his breath misting in the frigid air. We're running low on firewood, he said, his voice tight with concern. I'll need to make a run to the woodshed. I'll come with you, Sarah said, already pulling on her warmest clothes. It's too dangerous. Ezra Kane, we're partners. That means we face danger together. She gave him a pointed look. Or have you forgotten your vows already? A smile tugged at his bearded face. Stubborn woman. Mountain man who loves stubborn women, she countered, kissing him quickly before heading for the door. They ventured out into the brutal cold, roped together for safety. The wind howled like a living thing, trying to tear them apart. Halfway to the woodshed, Sarah's foot broke through a snow-covered depression. She fell hard, crying out as pain shot through her ankle. Ezra was there instantly, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, despite the deep snow. Where does it hurt? My ankle. I'm sorry, I should have been more careful. Hush. Let's get you inside. He carried her back to the cabin, moving with surprising speed through the drifts. Once inside, he set her gently on their bed and carefully removed her boot. Her ankle was already swelling. Go slow, Sarah hissed as he examined it. It hurts. I know, love, I know. His large hands were infinitely gentle as he probed the injury. Not broken, but badly sprained. You'll need to stay off it for at least a week. Sarah's eyes widened. A week? But the chores? I'll manage the chores. You'll manage resting. He wrapped her ankle carefully, his expression brooking no argument. Sarah, you've proven your strength 100 times over. Now prove you trust me to take care of you. She sighed, but nodded. Over the next week, Sarah discovered a new dimension to their relationship. Ezra brought her meals, helped her to the privy, read to her by the fire in the evenings. His gentleness with her rivaled his fierceness in protection, and Sarah fell even deeper in love watching him care for her. One evening, as she sat with her foot elevated, watching him prepare dinner, she said softly, I'm not used to this. He looked up from the pot he was stirring. Used to what? Being cared for. My whole life I've had to be strong, to survive. Depending on someone else feels strange. Ezra set down his spoon and came to kneel beside her chair. You are strong, the strongest person I know. But strength isn't about never needing help. It's about knowing when to accept it. He took her hand. I depend on you too, you know. Every day. For what? For reminding me why I'm alive. For making this cabin a home instead of a hiding place. For giving me a reason to face tomorrow. He pressed a kiss to her palm. We lean on each other, Sarah. That's what together means. Tears pricked her eyes. How did I get so lucky? I ask myself the same question every morning when I wake up beside you. When spring finally arrived, it came with an explosion of wildflowers and rushing streams fed by melting snow. Sarah's ankle had healed completely, and she was eager to explore beyond the cabin. Ezra had promised to take her to a special place, a hidden valley he'd discovered years ago. They set out on horseback at dawn, Sarah riding the mare Ezra had gentled for her. The mountain air was crisp and sweet, carrying the scent of pine and new growth. As they rode, Ezra pointed out animal tracks, edible plants, the signs of changing weather. You've taught me so much, Sarah said, guiding her horse alongside his. Sometimes I wonder what I have to offer you in return. Ezra reached across the space between their horses and caught her hand. You gave me back my life. That's not nothing. They reached the hidden valley by midday, and Sarah gasped. It was a perfect bowl of green meadow, surrounded by towering peaks, with a crystal-clear stream running through the center. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in waves of purple, yellow, and white. It's beautiful, she breathed. My Clara would have loved this place, Ezra said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I found it the first year I came to the mountains. Couldn't bring myself to come back until now. Sarah understood immediately. Because it hurt too much. Yeah, but with you here, it feels different. Like I can remember the good parts without drowning in the loss. He dismounted and helped her down. I wanted to share it with you. All the beautiful things I've been too scared to look at. They spread a blanket and ate the lunch Sarah had packed. As they lay in the meadow afterward, watching clouds drift across the brilliant blue sky, Sarah turned to face him. Tell me about her. About Clara. Ezra's eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. She was 5 when she died. Had her mother's laugh, this bright, bubbling thing that could make anyone smile. She loved collecting rocks, pretty ones she'd find by the creek. Had a whole box of them. He paused. I left that box behind when I came here. Left everything. Do you regret that? Sometimes. But I was half mad with grief back then. Thought if I could just get far enough away, I could outrun the pain. He turned to look at Sarah. Didn't work, of course. You can't outrun your own heart. Sarah touched his face gently. What would you tell her if you could? Clara, I mean. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. I'd tell her that her daddy got lost for a while, but a brave woman helped him find his way back. I'd tell her I'm happy again and that it's okay to be happy. That loving Sarah doesn't mean I love her or her mother any less. It doesn't, Sarah said firmly. Love doesn't divide, Ezra. It multiplies. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. How'd you get so wise? From a mountain man who taught me that surviving isn't the same as living. They stayed in the valley until sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. On the ride back, Ezra was quieter than usual, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the haunted silence Sarah had seen in his early days. That night, as they lay in bed, Ezra whispered into the darkness, Thank you. For what? For letting me talk about them. Some women might be jealous or uncomfortable. Sarah propped herself up on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. They're part of who you are. I love all of you, Ezra. The parts that are healed and the parts that still hurt. Your past doesn't threaten me. It made you the man I fell in love with. He pulled her down for a kiss that started gentle and grew heated. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ezra rested his forehead against hers. I want a future with you, he said. Children, if we're blessed. A life full of moments like today. Then that's what we'll build, Sarah promised. Together. Together, he echoed, sealing the word with another kiss. Summer brought unexpected visitors. Sarah was in the garden she'd planted, vegetables and herbs growing strong in the mountain soil, when she heard horses approaching. Her hand instinctively went to the rifle Ezra insisted she keep nearby, but she relaxed when she recognized Sheriff Tucker's gray gelding. 2 people rode with him, a well-dressed woman in her 40s and a nervous-looking man with spectacles. Mrs. Kane, Tucker called out, tipping his hat. Got some folks here who'd like to speak with you and your husband. Ezra emerged from the barn, his massive frame blocking the doorway, eyes assessing the strangers. He relaxed marginally when he saw Tucker, but remained alert. Sheriff, he greeted, what brings you up the mountain? The woman dismounted with practiced ease. Mr. and Mrs. Kane, I'm Margaret Thornton, attorney at law from Denver. This is Albert Whitmore. She gestured to the bespectacled man. He's your cousin, Mrs. Kane. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Cousin? I don't... Your father's brother's son, Albert interrupted, dismounting clumsily. I've been searching for you since I heard what your uncle tried to do. I'm so terribly sorry I didn't know sooner. Ezra moved to stand beside Sarah, his presence solid and reassuring. What do you want with my wife? Margaret Thornton pulled papers from her saddlebag. Your grandfather, Sarah's grandfather, passed away 6 months ago. He left his entire estate to Sarah, his only surviving grandchild. We've been trying to locate you since. Sarah's legs felt weak. Estate? I don't understand. Grandfather was a farmer. He was also a very successful investor, Albert said gently. He owned property in Denver, mining interests, railroad stock. Mrs. Kane, you've inherited nearly $50,000. The world tilted. Ezra's arm came around her waist, holding her steady. 50,000, Sarah repeated numbly. That can't be right. It is, I assure you, Margaret said. Your grandfather was estranged from your father due to his drinking, but he never stopped caring about you. He hired investigators to track you down, but by the time they found your uncle's house, you'd already fled. When we heard about the incident with Luther Grimm, we knew we had to find you. Sarah looked up at Ezra, seeing her own shock reflected in his eyes. We don't need money, Ezra said firmly. We have everything we need right here. Spoken like a man of principle, Margaret said with approval. But Mrs. Kane, the money is yours regardless. What you do with it is your choice. However, there are legal matters that require your attention. Property deeds to sign, accounts to establish. You'll need to come to Denver. Sarah's mind raced. $50,000. It was more money than she'd ever imagined. They could leave the mountain, buy a ranch in the valley, live in luxury. But as she looked around, at the cabin they'd made a home, the garden she'd planted, the mountains that had given them refuge and peace, she realized she didn't want any of that. How long would we need to be in Denver? She asked. A week? Perhaps 2? Sarah looked at Ezra. What do you think? His gray eyes searched hers. It's your inheritance, Sarah. Your decision. No, ours. Everything we have, we share. Together, remember? A smile tugged at his lips. Together. Then I think we should go handle your grandfather's business and come home. Come home, Sarah repeated, the words feeling right. Yes. They made the journey to Denver 3 weeks later, after carefully securing the cabin and arranging for a neighbor to check on their animals. For Ezra, who hadn't been to a city in 7 years, it was overwhelming. The noise, the crowds, the sheer press of humanity made him tense and uncomfortable. But Sarah was there, her hand in his, anchoring him. The legal proceedings were complex but straightforward. Sarah signed papers, established accounts, and learned the full extent of her grandfather's holdings. Margaret Thornton proved to be not just an attorney, but an advocate, ensuring Sarah understood every decision she made. "What will you do with the money?" Margaret asked over dinner one evening. Sarah looked at Ezra, who squeezed her hand encouragingly. "We'll keep enough to ensure security," Sarah said, "but I'd like to establish a fund for women fleeing dangerous situations, so they have somewhere to go, resources to start over. No woman should have to trade her mother's ring for a meal because she has no other options." Margaret's eyes shone with approval. "That's a wonderful idea. I'd be honored to help you set it up. And," Sarah continued, "I'd like to purchase the land around our cabin, make it officially ours, protected, so no one can force us to leave." "I can arrange that as well." Albert, who'd been quiet through our dinner, finally spoke. "Cousin Sarah, I know we don't know each other, but I hope we might stay in contact. I'd like to visit, if you're willing. Get to know you, make up for the family that failed you." Sarah considered him, this nervous, earnest man who'd traveled hundreds of miles to find her and make things right. "I'd like that," she said finally. "We don't have much up on that mountain, but we have room for family." Ezra nodded his agreement. "Any blood of Sarah's is welcome at our table." On their last night in Denver, Ezra and Sarah walked along the quiet streets, avoiding the rowdier establishments. Ezra had been increasingly restless, and Sarah knew he was eager to return to the mountains. "This must be hard for you," she said softly. "All these people, the noise." "It is," he admitted, "but you're here, so it's bearable. We're leaving tomorrow, one more day." He stopped walking and pulled her into the shadows of a building, away from the street lamps. "Sarah, I need to know something. All this money, these opportunities, do you have regrets about choosing a life on a mountain with a hermit?" Sarah cupped his bearded face in her hands. "Ezra Kane, you listen to me. I could have all the money in the world, live in the finest house in Denver, wear silk and jewels every day, and I would trade it all for one more morning waking up beside you in our cabin. The mountains are my home because you're there. Do you understand?" His eyes glistened in the dim light. "I just want you to be happy." "I am happy. Deliriously, impossibly happy. You gave me something no amount of money can buy. You gave me myself back, my strength, my hope, my future." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring 7 years of loneliness and 6 months of love into that connection. When they broke apart, both were trembling. "Let's go home," Ezra whispered against her lips. "Yes, let's go home." The next day, they began the journey back to the mountains. With each mile, Sarah felt Ezra relax beside her, his shoulders loosening, his breathing deepening. And when their cabin finally came into view, nestled against the mountainside with smoke rising from the chimney, thanks to their neighbor's care, Ezra let out a sigh of pure relief. "There it is," he said softly. "Home." Sarah leaned against him. "The money doesn't change anything, does it?" "Not a damn thing. We're still us, just us with the means to help others now. They dismounted and stood for a moment, looking at the cabin that had witnessed their journey from strangers to lovers to partners. I love you, Ezra Kane. I love you too, Sarah Kane. He picked her up suddenly, making her squeal with laughter. And now I'm carrying my bride over the threshold proper, since I forgot to do it the first time. You were bleeding from a gunshot wound. I think you get a pass. No passes, only second chances. He carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind them. And I plan to spend every single one of them loving you. Autumn arrived with a painter's palette of gold and crimson. Sarah stood on the cabin porch, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, the other shading her eyes as she watched Ezra chop wood. The shirt he wore stretched tight across his massive shoulders with each swing of the axe, and despite months of marriage, the sight still made her heart race. She'd been trying to find the right moment to tell him for 3 days now, ever since Doc Harrison had confirmed her suspicions during his monthly visit to check on the mountain folks. Mrs. Kane, you're about 2 months along, the old doctor had said with a warm smile. Congratulations, you're healthy and strong. I see no complications ahead. Now, watching her husband work with easy strength, Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness. They'd talked about children in abstract terms, but this was real. A baby. Their baby. Ezra looked up, catching her watching him. His serious face softened into a smile that still took her breath away. He set down the axe and walked toward her, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. You're staring, Mrs. Kane. Can you blame me, Mr. Kane? He laughed and pulled her close, kissing her soundly. When he drew back, his expression turned concerned. You've been quiet lately. Something troubling you? This was the moment. Sarah took his large, calloused hand and placed it on her stomach. Ezra, I'm pregnant. He froze, his gray eyes going wide. Pregnant? About 2 months, Doc Harrison confirmed it. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then slowly, reverently, he sank to his knees before her, his arms coming around her waist, his forehead pressing against her stomach. A baby, he whispered, his voice breaking. Our baby. Sarah ran her fingers through his long hair, feeling his shoulders shake. Are you happy? He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face into his beard. Happy? Sarah, I never thought I'd have this again. A wife, a child, a family. I thought that part of my life was over. He pressed a kiss to her stomach. I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful beyond words. Sarah knelt down to meet him, taking his face in her hands. You're going to be an amazing father. I failed them before. Clara and her mother. No, you didn't fail them. Fever isn't something you could control, and you've carried that guilt long enough. She kissed him softly. This is a new chance, Ezra, for both of us. Our child will be so loved, so protected, so wanted. He pulled her close, holding her as if she might disappear. I'll keep you both safe, I swear it. I know you will. We'll keep each other safe. All 3 of us, together. The word hung between them, weighted with promise. Together, Ezra repeated, his hand still pressed protectively over her stomach. The pregnancy brought changes to their routine. Ezra became even more protective, insisting on doing all the heavy work, fretting when Sarah so much as lifted a pot. She found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she said one morning when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. I know, but Ezra Kane, I love you, but if you try to wrap me in cotton wool, I will go mad. I need to stay active to feel useful. Doc Harrison said so. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I just want everything to be perfect, for nothing to go wrong. Sarah's expression softened. She went to him, taking his hands. I know you're scared. After what happened to Clara and her mother, I understand. But fear can't rule our lives. We have to have faith. How? How do you have so much faith after everything you've been through? Because you taught me. You showed me that even after the worst losses, life can still be beautiful. That love can still bloom in the hardest places. She placed his hand on her growing belly. This baby is proof of that. Ezra leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers. You're stronger than I'll ever be. No, we're strong together. That's our secret. As autumn deepened, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Ezra built a beautiful cradle from pine he'd carefully selected and aged, carving intricate patterns into the wood. Flowers for Sarah, mountains for his lost Clara, and stars for the child to come. Sarah sewed tiny clothes, her heart full as she imagined the baby who would wear them. She'd never been particularly maternal. Survival had always taken precedence over dreams of children. But now, feeling the baby move inside her, she couldn't imagine anything more precious. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Sarah working on a small blanket, while Ezra polished the cradle, he spoke quietly. If it's a girl, I'd like to name her Clara Rose, after my daughter and your mother. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. That's beautiful. And if it's a boy? I was thinking Samuel, after your father, despite his faults. Everyone deserves to be remembered with love. Sarah set down her sewing and moved to sit in his lap, something that was becoming more difficult as her belly grew. You're going to be such a good father. I'm going to try. That's all any of us can do. Winter arrived early and fierce. Sarah's belly had grown round and full, and Doc Harrison estimated the baby would come in late December or early January. The prospect of winter birthing worried Ezra, but they'd prepared as best they could. Extra medical supplies, plenty of food stored, and a promise from their closest neighbor to check on them weekly. On a particularly cold night in mid-December, Sarah woke to a strange sensation. Not pain exactly, but a tightening across her stomach that made her catch her breath. Ezra, she whispered, shaking him gently. He was awake instantly, years of light sleeping as a soldier and mountain man making him alert. What's wrong? I think it might be time. He was out of bed immediately, lighting lamps, stoking the fire to a roar, his movements efficient despite the fear she could see in his eyes. It's too early, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Doc said late December. Babies come on their own schedule. Sarah tried to smile, but another contraction hit, stronger this time. We need to send for Doc Harrison. The pass might be blocked. Then you'll deliver this baby. Ezra, look at me. She waited until his frightened gray eyes met hers. We can do this, together. He took a shaky breath and nodded. Together. All right, tell me what you need. The labor was long and difficult. Sarah had known it would be painful, but the reality exceeded her imagination. Through it all, Ezra was there, holding her hand, wiping her brow, speaking words of encouragement even when his own face was white with fear. You're doing so well, love. So strong. I can't, Sarah gasped as another contraction tore through her. You can. You're the strongest person I know. You survived your uncle Luther Grimm. A mountain winter. You can survive this. Our baby needs you. I need you. Hours blurred together At some point, their neighbor Tom arrived, having come to check on them and realizing what was happening. His wife had birthed 6 children, and his calm presence helped ease Ezra's panic. "First babies take time," Tom said reassuringly. "She's doing fine." Finally, as dawn broke on a clear winter morning, Sarah felt the overwhelming urge to push. "The baby's coming," Ezra said, positioned to catch their child. "Sarah, you're almost there. Just a little more." With a final, desperate push, Sarah felt the baby leave her body. For one terrifying moment, there was silence. Then, a cry. Strong and healthy and perfect. "It's a girl," Ezra choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Sarah, we have a daughter." He wrapped the baby carefully and brought her to Sarah, placing the tiny, red-faced infant in her arms. Sarah looked down at her daughter, at Clara Rose Kane, and felt her heart expand beyond anything she'd thought possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Ezra sat beside them on the bed, his large hand gently touching his daughter's tiny head. "She's perfect. You're perfect. Both my girls." "Clara Rose," Sarah said softly, and the baby seemed to quiet at the sound of her name. "Welcome to the world, little love." Tom had slipped out quietly, leaving the new family alone. In the warm cabin, with sunlight streaming through the windows and the baby nestled between them, Sarah and Ezra looked at each other with wonder. "We did it," Sarah said. "You did it. You're incredible." "No. We did it together." Sarah touched his face gently. "Everything good in my life we've done together." Ezra kissed her softly, then pressed a feather-like kiss to their daughter's forehead. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." Spring arrived with new life everywhere, not just in the baby who'd transformed their world, but in the land around them. Clara Rose was 3 months old, a content baby with her mother's determination and her father's steady gray eyes. Sarah had bloomed into motherhood with the same fierce competence she brought to everything. She'd learned to carry Clara in a sling while working, to nurse while cooking, to function on broken sleep with good humor. Watching her with their daughter, Ezra fell in love with her all over again, deeper than before. "She's got your stubbornness," he said one morning, watching Clara refuse her feeding, turning her head away with determined little huffs. "And your dramatic flair," Sarah countered. "The way she throws her arms around when she's upset. That's all you." "I don't do that." "This is you absolutely do." Sarah finally got Clara latched and settled. "Remember when you found that bear had gotten into our food stores? You threw your hat across the yard." Ezra had the grace to look sheepish. "That was different." "Was it, though?" He couldn't help but laugh. These moments, easy teasing, shared joy in their daughter, felt like a gift he didn't deserve, but was grateful for every day. Albert had visited twice since Clara's birth, bringing gifts and slowly building a relationship with his cousin. More surprisingly, Margaret Thornton had become a frequent correspondent, updating Sarah on the Women's Refuge Fund they'd established. 5 women had already found safety and new starts thanks to Sarah's inheritance. "Your grandfather would be proud," Margaret had written in her latest letter. "You've taken his fortune and turned it into hope." But the most unexpected change came on a warm May morning when Doc Harrison arrived with unusual company. A young woman, barely 18, with a black eye and a terrifying expression. "Mrs. Kane, this is Lucy Brennan," Doc said. "She showed up at my office this morning, said she'd heard there was a place for women who needed to escape. I thought of you." Sarah was at the door immediately, Clara on her hip. One look at Lucy's haunted eyes, and she knew that look. She'd worn it herself Not so long ago. Come in, Sarah said gently. You're safe here. Lucy burst into tears. I'm so sorry to impose. I just didn't know where else to go. My husband, You don't need to explain. Sarah handed Clara to Ezra and took Lucy's arm, guiding her to a chair. I understand. I've been where you are. Over the next week, Lucy stayed in the small room they'd added to the cabin. Ezra taught her to shoot. Sarah taught her to cook and garden. And slowly the fear in Lucy's eyes began to fade. She was particularly good with Clara, and the baby seemed to sense her gentle spirit. I never thought I'd escape, Lucy confessed one evening, sitting with Sarah on the porch while Ezra played with Clara inside. Jackson was so careful to keep me isolated, to make me think I had nowhere to go. But you found the courage anyway, Sarah said. That's not nothing, Lucy. That's everything. You make it sound simple, but every day I'm terrified he'll find me. Sarah took her hand. We won't let that happen. Ezra and we protect our own, and you're one of ours now. True to their word, when Jackson Brennan showed up 3 weeks later, drunk and belligerent, demanding his property back, he found himself facing Ezra Kane in full protective fury. You need to leave, Ezra said, his voice deadly calm, rifle held casually but ready. Now. That's my wife. That's a woman under my protection. She doesn't want to go with you, and that's the end of it, Jackson sneered. You can't keep me from my own wife, you mountain freak. Sarah appeared in the doorway, Lucy behind her. I'm not going back, Jackson. I filed for divorce. Sheriff Tucker has the papers. You can't divorce me. I can, and I have. The judge granted it yesterday based on evidence of abuse. You're not my husband anymore. You're just a man who hurt me, and I'm done being hurt. Jackson's face turned purple with rage. He reached for his gun, but Ezra was faster. The rifle barrel pressed against Jackson's chest before his hand even touched his holster. Don't, Ezra said softly, and the quiet menace in his voice was more frightening than any shout. I've killed better men than you for less. Walk away while you still can. Something in Ezra's eyes, the cold promise of a man who'd seen real war, real violence, and wouldn't hesitate to protect what he loved, made Jackson back down. He stumbled away, hurling insults, but he was leaving. Sheriff Tucker, who'd been waiting at a distance in case things went south, rode up to meet Jackson and escorted him down the mountain. Inside, Lucy collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Sarah held her while Ezra stood guard at the door, Clara in his arms, still watchful. When Lucy had cried herself out, she looked up at Sarah with something like wonder. How did you do it? Find this courage, this strength. Sarah glanced at Ezra, who met her eyes across the room. I had someone show me I was worth saving, that I wasn't property, I was a person. And once I knew that, really knew it in my bones, everything changed. Can you teach me that? I can try, but mostly you have to teach yourself. You've already started, Lucy. You left, you came here, you stood up to him. That's all your courage, not mine. Over the following months, Lucy thrived. She gained weight, laughed more easily, learned to ride and shoot and trust again. Eventually, she decided to move to town, take a position as a school teacher that Margaret Thornton had helped her secure. I'll never forget what you did for me, Lucy said on the day she left. Both of you. Sarah hugged her tightly. You did it yourself. We just gave you a safe place to find your strength. After Lucy rode away, Sarah turned to find Ezra watching her with an expression of pure admiration. "What?" she asked. "You saved that girl's life. You know that, right? Just like you saved mine." Sarah went to him, standing on tiptoe to kiss him, while Clara babbled happily between them. "We saved each other, remember? That's how it works." That night, after Clara was asleep in her cradle, Sarah and Ezra sat on their porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you ever think about that night?" Sarah asked softly. "When I showed up at your door in the storm?" "Every day. Best thing that ever happened to me, wrapped up in the worst moment of your life." "It wasn't the worst moment. The worst moment was thinking I'd die in that snow. You made everything after that the best moments." Ezra pulled her close. "I was so scared when I opened that door and saw you there. Scared of feeling again, of hoping again. 7 years I'd locked my heart away, and there you were, forcing me back to life. Do you regret it? Coming back to life?" "Not for 1 second." He tilted her face up to kiss her. "You, Clara, this life we've built, it's more than I ever dreamed possible. I thought my story ended with loss. You showed me it was just beginning." Sarah rested her head on his massive shoulder, feeling safe and loved and home. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he agreed. The word of vow they renewed every day with every choice they made. In the mountains around them, night deepened. The cabin glowed warm against the darkness, a beacon of hope and love. Inside, a baby slept peacefully in a hand-carved cradle. And on the porch, 2 people who'd once been lost sat wrapped in each other's arms, having found everything they needed in this wild, beautiful, impossible place. They'd both traveled such long roads to get here, roads marked by pain and loss and desperation. But those roads had led them to each other, and that made every step worth it. For 7 years, the mountain man had seen no one. Then one night, a desperate woman knocked on his door. And in that moment, both their stories began anew. A story of survival becoming a story of love. A story of 2 broken people healing together. A story that proved that sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the harshest places. Their story, together. 3 years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Clara was now 4 years old, a bundle of energy with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. The cabin had expanded twice more, and the Kane homestead had become known throughout the territory as a place of refuge and new beginnings. Sarah stood in what they now called the Sanctuary Room, a large addition built specifically to house women escaping dangerous situations. Currently, it held 3 women. Martha, escaping an arranged marriage to a cruel rancher. Elena, a young Mexican woman who'd fled across the border from a violent husband. And Rose, a former saloon girl trying to escape that life and start fresh. Each woman had her own story, her own pain, her own journey toward healing. And Sarah, with Ezra's steady support, helped guide them all. But today brought news that would test everything they'd built. Sheriff Tucker rode up with a telegram, his face grave. Ezra met him at the door, immediately sensing trouble. "What is it?" "Wire from the territorial governor's office." Tucker handed over the paper. "They want to officially recognize what you folks are doing here. Make it a legitimate refuge with territorial funding and protection." Sarah joined them, Clara clinging to her skirts. "That sounds like good news." "It is," Tucker agreed. "But there's a catch. The governor wants to send an inspector first. Make sure everything's proper and above board before they commit funds." "We have nothing to hide," Sarah said. "When will they come?" 3 weeks. Woman named Charlotte Blackwood. She's known for being thorough and tough." Tucker shifted uncomfortably. "Word is, she doesn't think places like this should exist. Thinks women should work out their problems with their husbands, not run away." Ezra's jaw tightened. "Then why is she the inspector?" "Politics. The governor needs her vote on something, so he's giving her what she wants, chance to shut down places she disagrees with." Tucker looked apologetic. "I'm sorry to bring this trouble to your door." After Tucker left, Sarah paced the main room, her mind working through possibilities. The women in their care sensed the tension and gathered quietly. "What's happening?" Martha asked, her voice small. Sarah explained about the inspection, watching worry bloom on each face. "They'll send us back," Elena whispered, her accent thick with fear. "My husband, he find me. He kill me this time." "No one's sending you anywhere," Ezra said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "This is our land, our home. We decide who stays and goes, not some government inspector." "But if we don't cooperate, we lose the funding," Sarah pointed out. "And without that money, we can't help as many women. We're already stretched thin." "Then we'll make sure she has nothing to criticize." Ezra's eyes met Sarah's, and she saw the determination there. "We'll show her exactly what we're doing here, saving lives, giving second chances. If she has any humanity at all, she'll see the value in that." The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Sarah organized schedules, documented each woman's story with permission, compiled testimonials from previous residents who'd successfully started new lives. Ezra made repairs, ensured everything was safe and well-maintained, even practiced being diplomatic, which made Sarah smile, as diplomacy wasn't his natural strength. Clara, sensing the importance, was surprisingly well-behaved, helping in small ways that made Sarah's heart swell with pride. At 4 years old, her daughter already understood the concept of helping others. Charlotte Blackwood arrived on a cold autumn morning, riding in a proper carriage, with a driver and assistant. She was a severe-looking woman in her 50s, dressed in expensive Eastern clothing that looked absurd in the mountain setting. Her expression as she surveyed the homestead was one of thinly veiled disdain. "Mrs. Kane," she said coolly, barely glancing at Sarah's extended hand, "I'm here to evaluate your operation." "Welcome to our home," Sarah said with forced warmth. "This is my husband Ezra and our daughter Clara." Charlotte's eyes swept over Ezra's massive frame and long hair with obvious disapproval, then dismissed Clara entirely. "Shall we begin? I have a schedule to keep." The inspection was brutal. Charlotte questioned everything: the sleeping arrangements, the food quality, the moral character of the women in residence. She made notes constantly, her expression growing more disapproving with each answer. "And you allow these women to simply leave their marriages?" Charlotte asked, her voice sharp with judgment. "Without encouraging reconciliation?" "We support whatever choice they make," Sarah answered carefully. "If a woman wants to try to reconcile, we help her do that safely. But if a marriage is violent or dangerous, marriage is a sacred institution, Mrs. Kane. It requires work, sacrifice. Running away at the first difficulty is hardly the solution." Sarah felt her temper rise, but forced it down. "With respect, Mrs. Blackwood, what these women face isn't difficulty. It's abuse, violence, threat of death." "So they claim." Charlotte's tone made clear she doubted these claims. "Women can be quite dramatic when they don't get their way." Ezra, who'd been silent until now, spoke up, his voice deadly calm. "Ma'am, I've seen men dying on battlefields. I've seen real violence, real suffering. These women aren't being dramatic. They're surviving. There's a difference." Charlotte looked at him as if he were a dog that had suddenly spoken. "Mr. Kane, I appreciate your military service, but you're hardly qualified to judge domestic situations. I'm qualified to recognize abuse when I see it, and I'm qualified to stand against it." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Charlotte made a sharp note in her book, her lips pressed thin. "I'd like to interview the residents, alone." Sarah's protective instincts flared. "Some of them might not be comfortable. Then they have something to hide. I insist." Against Sarah's better judgment, she allowed it. Charlotte spent an hour with each woman, emerging from each interview with a progressively darker expression. When she finished, she called Sarah and Ezra into the main room. "Mrs. Kane, after careful consideration, I cannot recommend this facility for territorial funding." Sarah's heart sank. "Why not? You're harboring fugitives from legal marriages. You're encouraging women to abandon their duties and responsibilities. And frankly, the moral atmosphere here is questionable, at best." A household run by a former hermit of dubious background, she glanced at Ezra with distaste, is hardly a proper environment for vulnerable women. "That's not fair," Sarah said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "We've helped dozens of women start new lives. We've saved lives. You've disrupted the natural order. Now I'll be recommending to the governor that this operation be shut down entirely." "You can't do that," Ezra said, standing to his full imposing height. "This is our property. You have no authority here. But I have the governor's ear, and without his protection, how long do you think you'll last? How long before the husbands you're hiding these women from decide to take matters into their own hands?" Charlotte smiled coldly. "You've made enemies, Mr. Kane. I'd hate to see something unfortunate happen to your family." The threat hung in the air, barely veiled. After Charlotte left, Sarah collapsed into a chair, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "What do we do? She's going to destroy everything we've built." Ezra knelt beside her, taking her hands. "We fight. We find another way." "How? She has power, connections." "And we have truth on our side. We have the women we've helped, the lives we've saved. That has to count for something." Martha appeared in the doorway, her face determined. "Mrs. Kane, we heard everything, and we want to help." The other women gathered behind her, Elena, Rose, and 3 more who'd arrived in recent weeks. They stood together, united. "How?" Sarah asked. "We tell our stories, publicly. To newspapers, to anyone who'll listen." Martha's voice was stronger than Sarah had ever heard it. "Mrs. Blackwood thinks we're weak, that we'll hide. But we won't. We'll stand up and show everyone why places like this matter." Over the next week, something remarkable happened. Martha wrote a letter to the Denver Post, detailing her escape from her abusive arrangement and the sanctuary she'd found with the Kanes. The newspaper published it, and it sparked a wildfire of response. Other women came forward, not just those currently at the homestead, but previous residents, women who'd found new lives thanks to Sarah and Ezra's help. They wrote letters, gave interviews, testified publicly about what the Kane Refuge had meant to them. Lucy Brennan, now a respected schoolteacher, wrote a particularly powerful piece about how the Kanes had saved her life and given her the courage to reclaim it. Albert Whitmore used his business connections to gather support. Even Doc Harrison wrote to the Territorial Medical Board about the physical evidence of abuse he'd documented in women who'd come to the Kane homestead. The tide of public opinion shifted dramatically. What Charlotte Blackwood had tried to paint as a disruptive, immoral operation suddenly became a cause célèbre, a shining example of frontier justice and compassion. The governor, a politician who understood public sentiment, suddenly found himself in an awkward position. He called for a new investigation, this time led by a more sympathetic inspector. Charlotte Blackwood rode back up the mountain 2 months later, her expression thunderous. "You think you've won?" she said coldly to Sarah. "You've made me look like a fool." "No," Sarah replied calmly. "We just told the truth. If that made you look bad, maybe you should examine your own positions. This isn't over. I have friends, influence, and we have something stronger. We have people who believe in second chances, in protecting the vulnerable, in doing what's right instead of what's convenient." Sarah stood tall, meeting Charlotte's glare without flinching. "You can fight us if you want, Mrs. Blackwood, but you'll lose. Because what we're doing here, it matters. It saves lives, and people understand that." Charlotte left without another word, and they never heard from her again. The new inspection went smoothly. The territorial funding was approved, along with official protection. The Kane Sanctuary, as it became known, was recognized as a legitimate refuge, and similar places began opening throughout the territory. "We did it," Sarah said that night, lying in Ezra's arms, while Clara slept peacefully nearby. "We really did it." "You did it," Ezra corrected. "You had the vision, the strength to see it through. We did it together, like everything else." He kissed her softly. Together. Always. 5 more years passed, and the Kane homestead transformed into something neither Sarah nor Ezra had imagined that first desperate night in the blizzard. Clara was 9 now, a serious child with her father's thoughtful nature and her mother's fierce compassion. And she had a younger brother, Samuel, named for the baby they'd hoped for in those early years, though he'd come later than expected. Samuel was 4, all energy and mischief, with Sarah's dark hair and a smile that could charm anyone. He followed his father everywhere, trying to mimic Ezra's long strides and deep voice. The sanctuary had grown too. They now had a proper building, a large, well-constructed house that could hold up to 15 women and their children. Ezra had built it with his own hands, with help from men in town and some of the women they'd helped who'd chosen to stay and work at the refuge. Margaret Thornton visited regularly now, having become not just their legal advisor, but a dear friend. She sat on the porch with Sarah one warm summer evening, watching Ezra teach Samuel to whittle, while Clara read to a group of younger children. "You've built something extraordinary here," Margaret said, sipping her tea. "Do you ever think about what might have been? If you hadn't run into that storm? If Ezra hadn't opened his door?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, contemplating the weight of that question. "I try not to. It's too terrifying to think about. I might have died in that snow, or Luther Grimm might have caught me, or I might have ended up somewhere worse." "But you didn't. You ended up here." "I ended up home," Sarah corrected. "This place, this man, this life, it's everything I never knew I needed, everything I never thought I deserved. You deserved it all along. You just needed someone to show you that." Sarah smiled, watching Ezra patiently guide Samuel's small hands with the knife. "He showed me I was worth saving, that I wasn't property. I was a person. That one moment changed everything." Margaret set down her teacup, her expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking, what you've done here, it's important, but it's not enough. There are women all over the territory, all over the West, who need places like this, who need to know they're not alone. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we expand. Not just one sanctuary, but a network. Multiple locations, all connected, all working together. We could move women to safety, help them start over anywhere in the territory. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes bright with passion. With the territorial funding and the support we've built, we could make this happen, change the whole region. Sarah felt excitement and terror in equal measure. That's a huge undertaking. It is, but you've already proven it can work. And I have the legal expertise and connections to make it happen on a larger scale. We'd need partners, other families willing to open their homes. We'd need Ezra on board, Sarah said, glancing at her husband. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah explained Margaret's proposal. Ezra listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. It's a big step, he said finally. Bigger than anything we've done before. I know, but think about it, Ezra. We could help so many more women. Create a real system of safety and support across the whole territory. We could also paint bigger targets on our backs. Not everyone appreciates what we do. We've already had threats, confrontations. Sarah took his hands. I know it's dangerous, but isn't it worth it? To save more lives? Ezra looked at her, his gray eyes soft with love and concern. You're asking me to risk more than just ourselves now. We have children, Sarah. Clara and Samuel. I can accept danger to myself, but them? It was a fair point, one Sarah had been wrestling with herself. Maybe that's exactly why we should do it. To build a world where Clara and all the other little girls growing up don't have to fear the things we feared. Where they know there's always somewhere safe to run if they need to. He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled her close. How do you always know the right thing to say? Is that a yes? It's a let's think about it more, but I'm not saying no. Shh, I thought I'd die up there in those mines. Thought there was no escape. There's always escape, Sarah told her gently. You just have to know where to look. And now more women will know. Anna stayed with them for 2 months, regaining her strength and learning new skills. When she left, it was with a job waiting in Denver and a community of women ready to support her. Success stories like Anna's multiplied. The network grew to 8 houses, then 12. Each one became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of compassion and collective action. But success brought new challenges. The men whose wives and daughters fled to the sanctuaries weren't all willing to let them go quietly. Some tried to track them down. Others threatened legal action. A few resorted to violence. It was during one such confrontation that everything nearly fell apart. A man named Dutch Callahan tracked his wife Mary to the Kane homestead. He arrived with 3 friends, all armed, all drunk, and all determined to take Mary back. Ezra met them in the yard, rifle in hand, while Sarah hustled the women and children into the reinforced cellar they'd built for exactly this situation. Clara, old enough now to understand the danger, helped Sarah calm the younger children, her face pale but determined. Callahan, Ezra said, his voice carrying across the yard. You need to leave, now. Give me my wife, Kane. This is none of your concern. She doesn't want to go with you. That makes it my concern. I'll burn this place to the ground if I have to. You can try. Ezra's voice was calm, but deadly serious. But you'll be dead before the first flame catches. I've faced down better men than you, Callahan. Don't make me add you to that list. From inside the house, Sarah heard everything. She had her own rifle ready, positioned at a window with a clear view. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. They'd prepared for this. They knew it might come. What happened next was something neither of them expected. Mary Callahan emerged from the house, walking past Sarah before anyone could stop her. She strode into the yard, moving to stand beside Ezra. "Dutch," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I'm not coming back. Mary, get over here, now. No, I'm done being afraid, done letting you hurt me. Done pretending what you did was normal or acceptable. I'm staying here, and you're leaving." "The hell I am!" Mary pulled a pistol from her skirts, one Ezra had taught her to shoot, and pointed it at her husband with steady hands. "I said you're leaving, and if you ever come near me again, if you ever threaten these people who saved my life, I will shoot you myself. Do you understand me?" Dutch stared at his wife, clearly shocked by this transformation. The mousy, beaten woman he'd married had become something else entirely, something strong and unbreakable. "You wouldn't dare," he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "Test me," Mary said flatly. "Please, test me." The standoff lasted another tense minute. Then Dutch and his friends backed down, turned their horses, and rode away. They never came back. Inside, Mary collapsed into a chair, shaking with reaction. Sarah wrapped her in a blanket, while Ezra checked to make sure the men were really gone. "I can't believe I did that," Mary whispered. "You were amazing," Sarah said. "So brave." "I was terrified, but I realized something standing there. I'm more afraid of going back than I am of dying. And once I knew that, the fear of him just disappeared." Stories like Mary's spread. Word got out that the sanctuary women weren't helpless victims. They were fighters, survivors who'd stand their ground. The threats decreased, though they never stopped entirely. As winter set in, Sarah found herself reflecting on how far they'd all come. 9 years since that desperate flight through the blizzard. 9 years since Ezra opened his door to a stranger. She stood on the porch, watching snow fall gently, when Ezra came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his chin resting on her head. "How different everything is. How one moment can change everything." "Having regrets?" "Not even one. You?" He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes I think about who I was before you. That bitter, lonely man hiding from the world. I don't even recognize him anymore. He was just waiting," Sarah said softly, "for the right reason to come back to life. You gave me that reason. You and our children and all of this." He gestured at the sanctuary building, at the smoke rising from its chimneys, at the life they'd built. "I thought my story ended with loss. You showed me it was just beginning." Sarah turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her whole world. "For 7 years you hadn't seen a single woman until one night when the mountain man begged to make her his wife." He smiled at her recitation of their beginning, and she said yes. "Best decision I ever made begging like that. Best decision I ever made saying yes." They stood there in the falling snow, holding each other, while inside the sanctuary, women and children laughed and talked, warm and safe. The network they'd built continued to grow, touching lives across the territory and beyond. Clara came out, Samuel at her side. "Papa, Mama, are you coming in? We're going to sing carols." "We'll be right there," Sarah promised. But they stood a moment longer, just the two of them, remembering that first desperate night and marveling at everything that had grown from it. Inside, they gathered around the fire with their extended family, blood relations and chosen family both. They sang together, ate together, celebrated together. And in that moment, surrounded by love and warmth and hope, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that every hardship, every struggle, every moment of fear and pain had been worth it, because it led her here, home, to the man she loved, the children she cherished, and the life she'd built from nothing. Together they'd created something beautiful, something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. A legacy of hope, of second chances, of love stronger than fear. Their story, written in the wilds of the frontier, would inspire others for generations to come. And it all started with a knock on a door during a blizzard, and a man who chose compassion over isolation, who chose love over loss, who chose to live again, together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Sarah and Ezra's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.